Hi, everyone. My name is Tim Mikhelishvili, and I'm your host of the All Out Coach podcast, where leaders share their personal stories and evoke emotions, as well as their legacy, by adding energy and excitement, helping inspire people to stretch themselves and lift others. Today, it's an honor and a privilege to have a friend of mine on this podcast as my guest. His name is Tom Shelton. I met him a couple of years ago in a course that we took together, MIT's Leading Organizations and Change. He's the Director of External Relations at the National Center of Education and the Economy, with previous roles as the Director of the Kentucky State of Superintendents, managing the educational system. So as a person who's had teachers and physicians in my family that I've been influenced by, it was a tremendous pleasure to connect with you, Tom, 2 years ago. So welcome to this podcast. Tom, how are you today?
I'm doing well, and I'm very excited to have this opportunity and look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, likewise. It's a pleasure to reconnect. I'm really looking forward to helping a lot of the people who listen to All Out Coach be inspired by some of the stories that I remember you have told me and shared with me very generously. A little bit more about that course we took. At the time, 2 years ago, I was working in a small startup company in the pharmaceutical industry in which I've worked for 16 years, where I was tasked with helping restructure the culture and values of the organization on behalf of the medical division, which I represented. However, it was a small company, and there were very limited resources in developing and stretching ourselves or our career, those of us who worked there. So I had taken a vacation and really explored this course. So I was very lucky and fortunate to have met you there, Tom. And I want to start with my first question, and that is, can you tell us how you have stretched yourself and how you've developed your career over the years?
Well, I've tried to always take an approach to lifelong learning, and that started back, in my undergraduate work in accounting, but it's continued. I have a master's degree in business administration when I worked in business and industry, but subsequently, when I moved into working in education, it would seem like it was time for me to learn more, to be more effective and efficient there. And so I took courses to earn a second master's degree in educational administration. Subsequently had the opportunity to participate in a postgraduate certificate program at Harvard. Spent 3 years there working toward the certificate in executive educational leadership. And upon completion of it, made the decision to go ahead and earn my doctorate, my PhD in educational leadership and organizational development. When I became a school superintendent in my first district back in the late 90s, actually, it seems like so long ago, I thought, well, that's probably enough education and learning opportunities. But being in education, being around teachers and students all the time and having this focus on learning made me decide to subsequently take additional courses. And as I moved to my second district, where I became superintendent, pursued additional coursework, ultimately taking the course that you mentioned while I was the executive director of the State Superintendent Association here, where I took the course with you at MIT. And when I left that role, made a decision to take the position where I'm at now at the National Center on Education and the Economy. I've had the opportunity to also participate in another postgraduate certificate program through the London School of Economics, where I've just completed a certificate program in business, international relations, and the political economy to help me in my position there. And I'm currently have opportunities because of I'm visiting professor at Johns Hopkins University right now, and also teach adjunct here in Kentucky and a couple of the regional universities here, that I'm always trying to stretch myself in learning, because I always believe lifelong learning should be our focus. We should never stop learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was one of the qualities that really amazed me, given your role, your senior role and responsibilities that you've had in the state of Kentucky, that you continue to take this course, and you're an active contributor in our forums in which we participated together. Tom, so I want to ask you a little bit about who inspired you to teach, who have been some of the mentors in your life, or to be in this field?
Well, when I left industry and came into education, I did that because I met an individual who, he would never admit this because he's too modest, but he really changed my life and my whole focus. His name is Stu Silberman, and he's now retired and living in Florida. But Stu was an amazing leader. And he tapped me on the shoulder a number of times and encouraged me to pursue additional education, to take on additional leadership roles, as well as to work with and develop others. He strongly believed in transitional leadership and developing those around us. He helped me kind of focus on what I consider my primary driver that I've tried to always maintain and use, and that is that if you're the smartest person in the room, then you need to change rooms. And I say that purely because I've always tried to surround myself with people who are smarter than me. And by doing that, it challenges me, it helps me grow, it helps me develop. If I'm focused on growth and development, it's a lot easier for me to make sure that I help others grow and develop as well. The whole focus of education to me is developing the capacity of others. I think teachers want to develop the capacity of their students. And so as administrators and leaders, we have to make sure we develop the capacity of our teachers so that they can in turn do the same for our students. And that's what's going to help us all to be a better society and ultimately help our economy and our well-being in society, is to make sure that we're always developing the capacity of others.
I've been certainly influenced by teachers in my family. I have teachers and healthcare professionals in my family who I consider my mentors. My grandmother, for example, she taught for 32 years. That was her entire career, and she was a personal teacher for me as well, whom I admired, and in terms of her characteristics and her personal qualities as well, not just professional ones. I want to ask you how you have risen up to be trusted with more responsibilities over your career. What do you attribute to having more and more responsibilities throughout the districts and all those thousands of students that you were responsible for in the beginning, and then managing the superintendents later on?
If I had to sum it up, I guess it would be on what I call my 4-point leadership strategy.
Mm-hmm.
If I could touch on those 4 points, the first thing that I strive to do is work on relationships with others. I think you have to have a relationship with those that you're leading, as your peers, those that are your superiors, and any of those other stakeholders who you work with. So the first point is relationships. And so when I've been put into leadership roles, I take the time to try to get to know the people that work with me and for me, and that I work with on a day-to-day basis. So I think it's important that we know who your significant other is, who your children are, what are your interests in life, what are your career aspirations. So I think you have to build a relationship first. After you build a relationship, then it comes to what my second point, which is expectations. I think it's very important in a leadership role that you sit down and take the time to understand what the expectations are of those who work for you and with you, and that they understand what your expectations are, and that you talk about those and you make sure that there's alignment in those. That's a whole lot easier if you have that relationship that I talked about first.
Yeah,
A lot
absolutely.
easier to talk about expectations if you have a relationship. And
Right.
then after expectations, the next point that I always focus on in leadership is resources. So, if you have that relationship and you've discussed expectations and you kind of are talking about and figuring out where you need to go, then you have to make sure the person has the resources they need to get where you want them to be and where the organization needs them to be. And that could be what you described earlier in the training and development that they need. It could be in financial resources. It could be in human capital. Resources come in a lot of different ways, but if people don't have the resources to get the job done, then it's hard for them ever to meet the expectations that you have for them. And that leads to my fourth point, which is accountability. You then have to be able to hold each other mutually accountable. One, that you're providing the leadership, direction, support, providing the resources they need. And then based on that relationship that you have with the person, it's easy to hold them accountable and say, why did you get this done? Or how did you not see this? Or why couldn't you have done this better? Because if you follow the 4 points, once again, relationships, expectations, resources, and accountability, if you follow that model, I think it helps you be an effective leader, which builds trust. And as you've mentioned, if you're going to truly inspire and lift others and move forward as a leader, you have to have trust.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that formula very much, Tom. One aspect that I find truly inspiring is that your work has centered around developing people and creating other leaders, which is a criterion, I think, for all leaders, a necessary criterion. You're not a leader until you create other leaders. Yet, we are living in a time in which there's a shortage of mentors in this distracted, digitally based world in which we live. So, in the time of distance learning that is taking place now, particularly after the COVID-19 global catastrophe, this predicament that we're all living, what are some different formats of education that you think would be more productive for the next generation?
I think the first thing you have to always think about when you're focusing on what types of approaches we need to use to ensure learning is you have to look at the characteristics of the learner and look at the desired outcomes of the learner.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're talking about students in preschool through 12th grade who I've spent the majority of my career focused on, or whether you're talking about, post-secondary at college or technical environments, or whether you're talking about, professionals and adult learning, you have to look at, what are the desired outcomes and make sure that you're focusing school around the learner. The models that we've had that have been around for so long were focused more, in my opinion, on the teacher and on the instructor than they were on the learner.
I see.
And I think that has been to our detriment. We have to learn and recognize that people do learn differently. The other thing we have to recognize is that we live in an age where assessment and accountability are very high stakes, and people are watching and monitoring things on a regular basis to see how performance is. Everybody wants everything done quickly. They want it done yesterday.
Yep.
And real change, real improvement takes place over time, and it takes place at different rates depending on who the person is and how they learn. The other issue that has to be considered that you and I have talked about several times is the equity principle. And I have to bring that in here. You have to look at making sure we provide opportunities, remove barriers that prohibit or even inhibit, the opportunities of others. And we're a great country. I still think America is the greatest country in the world, but we focus so much in our country around being equal that I think we've forgotten the concept of equity. Not everybody has the same opportunities. Not everybody has the same resources as others, but everybody has the possibility of being able to achieve and be successful at a high level. And we're a better country when that happens. And so we have to make sure that whether it's coaching, individual coaching, like, you might have had apprenticeships, if you think about it, back in the early days of our country. So the way most people learned was they worked as an apprentice for someone else, and they would learn their field or their profession that way. But in today's society, you can do that a lot through technology, as you mentioned. You can use the internet, you can use chat rooms, you can use cohort groups. There are just so many different ways to do it. One of mine is particular ways to learn is I'm in 3 different book study groups right now. I read at least one book a week, have for most all of my career. So I'm in a book study group around one that's focused on leadership books, one that's focused on society and social issues books, and one that's just fiction reading opportunity. And I think, I learn and grow. But I go back to what I said to you earlier. I always try to surround myself with people who are smarter than I am, and that's usually not very hard to do. Because, when you find good people, you can always learn something from them.
You mentioned a few different programs and approaches in the Kentucky educational system. Can you give us a few specifics on what unique educational approaches worked in Kentucky?
Well, one of the things that we tend to do is we tend to work within silos, and it's a natural thing that happens, but education can become a silo within itself. And if education is not connected with the rest of the world, then we have problems, because we're not going to be as effective and efficient, and our learners are not going to know everything they need to know to be successful. So what we've tried to focus on in the districts I've worked in, and the districts that I work with now, is how do we make sure that the entire, to use the current buzzword that's out there, the entire ecosystem supports education. And what I mean by that is that everybody has a stake in education. It's not just the teachers. It's not just the administrators. We have to make sure that if we're going to have, society that we want to have, and have the economy that we want to have, and create productive citizens, then we have to make sure that everyone's involved. So what we did in my first district, where I was superintendent, and then subsequently thereafter in the other places I worked, was make sure that we had all stakeholders involved in developing the systems and the structures. And so I coined the phrase that we used in my first district, community campus. And the idea was that learning doesn't just take place from 8 to 3 in a classroom with 4 walls Monday through Friday. But that's the way our, P-12 education system, and even our collegiate school system is structured, we don't seem to recognize that, one, you need to have opportunities after school, before school, weekends, nights, summers. And so what we did is said, education and learning should happen at any time and in any place. And we created opportunities where we had a health sciences academy. We had a STEM academy, the science, technology, engineering, and math. We had a business and banking and insurance academy. We created real world academies where students could see the relevancy of what they were learning and how it applied in the workplace. And we did that by talking with members of our Chamber of Commerce, members of our economic development community, local leaders in government, to make sure that we were creating opportunities where there would be job opportunities and where students could actually go straight from school into employment or could build into a post-secondary educational experience and ultimately develop a career. And I think when you involve all stakeholders like that and make sure that the entire ecosystem is supporting education, and we recognize that education is everyone's business, then we can make sure students are successful and our future generations are successful. Because we have to face it, these are the people who are going to be taking care of us. We're all living longer right now. And if I could just give one last personal example to close this statement or close this question, my youngest daughter is just completing her physical therapy program. And I'm scheduled, not in the too near future, to have both a hip replacement and a knee replacement. And I'm excited that I already have in my own family someone who can work with me and provide physical therapy solutions and help support me in that. And the reason that I bring that up is when she was a student back in one of the schools that I was responsible for as a superintendent, she saw the need for physical therapy by her two grandfathers who both had limbs replaced and had prosthetic limbs. And so she has grown and worked toward that field her entire life. And, that's the type of passion we need for learning. That's the type of love we need for learning, is someone who learns something that they want to do from an early age and then has the opportunities in front of them where they can do that later in life and become a lifelong path of career success for them.
Yeah, that's an amazing example. And that's something that has stuck with me over 2 years since that first time that we talked, in terms of that example that you provided with the community campus in Kentucky, which is something that's unique. It's a unique phenomenon. I want to ask very quickly, just what were some of the outcomes of the community campus initiative? Because I remember you had mentioned those to me 2 years ago.
Yeah. Subsequent to me leaving that district, there's been two superintendents who've been there, both who are friends of mine, and so I stay in constant contact there. Yep. I lived in that community myself for 25 years, so yep. I know now that within that community, they have a career path, for students that is creating better engagement in this and better outcomes for students. But it's also creating opportunities for employment, filling jobs to where it's bringing business and industry to the area, because, one of the reasons a business and industry will locate to a particular area is they have to have, an employees there that they can hire. They have to have people they can hire that meet their needs. And, so if in the community campus model, we knew that what areas of business and industry were growing and which we're going to need, employees because of the, career trajectories of those who were already there. Yeah. And so we have people who are gainfully employed coming right out of high school. We have, colleges and universities who have partnered with the school district to create career paths for the students to learn professions. And then greater technical schools there. They've now, I know, that particular community is one of the communities who has a company that's been developed through this whole process that is using tobacco plants, which is, of course, very native to Kentucky and the area, toward creating vaccinations for COVID. So. Wow. It's pretty exciting to see what's going on there in that small community.
You laid such a strong foundation and to have that legacy, because I remember you talking about those success metrics even 2 years ago, and now to hear how they're merging education and the value of education with the economy, which I think was very forward thinking on your part. You know, teaching is such a fundamental profession that lays that foundation and that framework early on, or that ideology early on in the minds of children, without teachers, you really don't have a lot of the scientists, the doctors or lawyers, right? So I have a very personal appreciation for teaching, but teaching has certainly, I think, evolved. The perception and the value of our teachers has changed, I think, just as I reflect on when I was in elementary school or when I was in college even, and when then I went on to pharmacy school. And as I've reflected, what I have observed is that the students right now, they have a little bit more demands of their teachers and a little bit less respect than I grew up with. For me, teacher was an authority. I did not even dare question a teacher's authority, but I tried my best to kind of learn and try to do the best I could, even if the teacher was not great at communicating the information. I've had cases in my career in education where I had to take a same subject with a different teacher, and I got a completely different value out of it and a different grade as well subsequently than I did with another teacher, but I never questioned the authority. But to finish my thought here, the next generation, or the young generation, is now much more demanding, and I think a little bit too impatient. And the one point that you made about wanting everything right away, trying to reap the benefits of any information that you are taught later on down the line, it reminds me of the book The Pause Principle by Kevin Cashman. Try to take a pause and try to step back before you lead or you leap forward, if you will. There's some latest data that I've seen, Tom, where a lot of the business school graduates, they no longer work for corporations, and they're impatient. They don't want to go through that experience, that apprenticeship that you talked about, and they pay all that money to get that MBA, but after which they just start to be entrepreneurs. So I think that, a society in which you have everyone who is trying to be an entrepreneur and just work for themselves is just as unhealthy, I think, as a society in which you have everyone who is subordinate and who doesn't have any independent thinking either. So there needs to be some kind of balance between these two kind of approaches. Your apprenticeship model, the community campus model, I think is very forward thinking, particularly in this world in which we live now, where we need to be much more specialized in our skills than ever before, regardless of our industry. I am in the pharmaceutical industry, where in my particular role, I teach and I learn at the same time. And I teach and I learn from scientific experts who help treat and transform many patient lives. You continue to learn, despite being a teacher, you continue to teach at Johns Hopkins. And I think that's what really makes your time here and your personal stories so relevant to the next generation. What is one advice that you have to these impatient students graduating now? Any other specific advice you would have, Tom?
Well, there's two or three things that come to mind from your comments. The first thing that I have to bring up is the fact that in today's world, as compared to when you and I grew up, even though you're considerably younger than I am, content is a commodity now. And let me explain my statement there. Because of the internet, content knowledge is available in a handheld device, in a laptop, in so many different ways now that it wasn't available when we were kids. And so teaching has had to change enormously from the purveyor of content knowledge to teaching students how to use that content and to apply that content, which is a much higher level. I won't get into Bloom's taxonomy, but if you looked at the levels of learning, teachers now can't just be what we used to call the sage on the stage, where they're just dumping content knowledge on students because students have that content knowledge at their fingers. And so the first point I would make is that I think that creates an impatience in students that you referred to, because it's like, why should I have to know what 2 times 2 is or 2 plus 2 is, because I've got a handheld device that I can find the answer in seconds, or less, or milliseconds. And so they don't see the relevancy in learning a lot of the things that you and I learn, and that creates that impatience. That's the first thing I would mention.
Right. Yep.
Second thing is that I would mention is, because we're talking about teaching evolving and changing so much, the other thing that has happened is we've put so many demands on the teachers now because of regulations, of requirements. I mentioned earlier assessment and accountability. We're the only country in the world, in the United States is the only country in the world that still tests all of its students every year in reading and math. And teachers put so much focus on that accountability that they don't really have time to develop the other things that students need to help them be successful. So as a career educator, I feel I have to say on behalf of our teachers, our culture of high stakes accountability and assessment doesn't allow teachers to do what they need to do to create students' capacity to be where students would like to be. And students, I can tell you, that also creates impatience in them. I've seen so many students who are saying, what difference does it make if I make a certain score on statewide accountability score? That doesn't matter if I'm going to be successful in life, right? Because there's no tie to that, whether they get into college or whether they start a business or career. And then the third point I have to make is in reference to your comment about what would I say to students? What I would say to them is that I realize we're in a society that's instant gratification, that everything can happen in just split seconds. We read in 144 characters now. Everything is just instant, short. We get, instant blurbs of information through social media and other places. Is that if you really want to be ultimately successful in life, one of the things that none of us do enough of, including myself, is spend enough time in reflection. And what I mean by that is I encourage teachers to do this. When you're sitting down in planning meetings, or when you're sitting down after school, or you're sitting down in your daily time when you're preparing, is spend time reflecting on what you have learned and how it applies to your life and what it can do to improve life for you and for others. And so I would just encourage everybody. I encourage my own daughters to do this. Spend time in daily reflection of who you are, what you've learned, and how you can use that information to help others.
I don't think that enough really self-reflect to understand where their place is in society. One of the reasons that I think young people do not self-reflect as much may be that instant gratification that they're looking for, which they owe to the type of world in which they live. And I think that was demonstrated recently when they went out to the beaches and just continued to celebrate, and without responsibility to others, during the COVID-19 epidemic, in which they posed danger to others, much less to themselves. I want to ask about leadership, about company culture as well, and organizational culture. I once said on All Out Coach that if leadership were taught to children, then it wouldn't be such an foreign language as adults. I want to ask you to give us somewhat of an inside look into some of the leadership that you've observed and some of the lack of leadership among executive or among seniors, or in your industry, in your field
Okay.
as well?
First of all, I completely agree with you. I think leadership development starts when you're working with children, and I think it should be part of what we do in our educational system. There are great programs out there. Not trying to sell anybody's particular program, but there's programs like Franklin Covey's Leader in Me, which is based on Stephen Covey's 7 habits, of highly effective leaders that teachers and schools can use to develop leaders. Because I have to agree with you that that's where leadership starts, and that's where we should teach it. But to your point and to your question, I've seen great examples of leadership. I mentioned my mentor and friend, Stu Silverman, earlier, who still is probably the single greatest example in my profession of leadership I've ever seen. He's an incredible leader, incredible learner. And then I've been exposed to those type of people because of what I mentioned earlier, always seeking out to learn from others, to read and to find those examples. Mm-hmm. And so there are great leaders that we can learn from in whatever field we're in. But I really would like to focus on the part of your question where I saw the lack of leadership. And what I would say in that is that I first believe that leadership is based on who you are as a person and what do you value and believe. And if we have a value and belief that everyone can learn, everyone can be successful, and we want to see that happen for everyone else because we all benefit when that happens, then we have to live by those lifelong values and beliefs. And I've seen school board members, I've seen superintendents, unfortunately, I've seen principals and other district leaders and even teachers who don't really believe that. I've experienced it in districts where I've worked. I experienced it to the level where, one district I worked, I ended up leaving. I wish I could have stayed there and now in retrospect and probably challenged some people a little bit more because they wanted to say in public that they, really believed in equity for all students and, the opportunity for everybody to be successful should be there. But when I saw that they really didn't believe what they were saying and didn't want to commit the resources and time to do that, I made a decision to leave that district. I'll kind of close my answer by saying, John Maxwell quote, everything rises and falls on leadership. And if we don't have great leaders, then we're not going to have great schools. We're not going to have great corporations. We're not going to have, good government. We're not going to have anything without good leaders. And so, that's why I now work with the National Center on Education and the Economy, is because our whole focus is on developing educational leaders. And I think more of us have to focus on how we make sure that we're, investing in others to be good leaders.
Yep. What is one rule or principle that you have applied that has worked for you? Is there a system that others that you haven't mentioned already? And I know that you already shared some great ones already, but any other rule or principle you will?
I would have to say that, it's an old Mark Twain quote, actually, that's a rule that it's always do right. You'll amaze some and you'll astonish the rest. Mm-hmm. So the rule I always try to apply on is always do what's right, mm-hmm. no matter, what. Some people are not going to be happy with that. I realized being a school superintendent that if I was going to be focused on trying to make everybody happy, then I was never going to be successful at my job, and I was never going to be able to help our district move forward. Mm-hmm. And I'll give just one small example. Calling a day of school off for inclement weather, like a snow day, that's a normal decision that a superintendent has to make. I advise young superintendents all the time, if you think you can make a decision to call off school and make everybody happy, then you're just going to be frustrated and you're not going to be effective, because no matter what you do, somebody's going to think you should have gone on a day you called off, or they should have think you called off on the day that you went. And so just do what you think is right in a situation based on the best information that's there, I think, is a rule I try to live by, and I think we all should.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me of a slogan at AstraZeneca that has stuck with me over the years: winning the right way. Because
Yeah.
I think that in that one short phrase was summarized an entire culture and an entire behavior, or a specific behavior that all the employees were guided towards and could interpret. Because simple adjectives like trust, passion, hard work, right, are great, but they're not action verbs. And winning the right way is a particular example of a slogan that I think stimulates a specific behavior. And that brings me to a question on character, and actually a few questions that I want to ask you on character, because I'm sure you've had to deal with many different types of characters. So I want to delve into your work managing superintendents or managing in Kentucky thousands of students, in terms of what were some of your behaviors or your guidelines when you hired or when you had to discipline people, which I imagine you had to do. What was your personal approach?
Was never as successful at that as I would have liked to have been, but what our focus we tried to make is hiring people that have the right dispositions, that are going to make good decisions, that are going to do what is right over time. It's people can say the right things in an interview. People can look great on paper, but the reality of it is you want to know, based on the vision that you have, the mission, the values, the beliefs that you have as an organization, that people over time can not only commit to those, but can live those out in what they do. And so we would try to ask questions that would reveal their dispositions and how they would act in situations. We would ask questions that made them apply their learning in a situation, like a case study that they might have to do, or a writing sample they might have to provide.
I see.
And so we would look at, what are their dispositions, and we would look to see, okay, what character traits does that reveal? But the other part of your question is huge, if you're going to establish the right type of organizational culture, you have to provide the accountability or the discipline on the other side. You can't tolerate those things not happening, because then that basically shows the rest of your employees, your students, and everyone else that you really don't believe that yourself, if you're going to allow it for others to do that. And so, I had to discipline a lot of people, had to make a lot of terminations as a school superintendent. Especially in Kentucky by law, you're the only person who can terminate an employee in a school district. Another supervisor can't terminate an employee. It has to go to the superintendent level to make that ultimate decision. And so I would always try to look at two things. One, what was best for students and for kids, because that's why we're there. That's our ultimate vision and driver. And in an organization, I would say to a leader, that's the first thing you have to look at is what's your ultimate driver? What's the reason you exist? And so ours was students. So the first thing I look at was what's best for students in this situation. And then the second thing is which is directly tied to that is this person, did they make, a mistake? Did they have a lapse in judgment, or did they do something that shows that they don't have the character, they don't have the values that we want here in our organization? if someone makes a mistake, in most cases, you can give them a chance for redemption. But if someone shows a true character flaw, someone shows that they really, don't believe in focusing on, the right things, the values and beliefs that the organization has, then really there's no place for them in the organization.
Can a character flaw be misinterpreted for behavior in instances? For example, people can behave out of their character because of their environment, right? Because character is a colorful spectrum of different parts of which you express in different situations in front of different people. Is there a time where you, for example, behaved out of your character, or you did something that was inconsistent with who you were and the values that you stood for, and why? What was the root cause?
I alluded to it actually earlier, and I didn't go into it in depth, which I will now.
Sure.
I was in a situation where, I was being challenged by some of the leaders that worked with me in a district I was in, by some of stakeholders in the district, and even by two particular board members. I was being challenged to make decisions and lead our district against my own values, philosophies, and beliefs. Mm-hmm. And also, it was against the values and beliefs that we stated as an organization and as a district. And so normally what I would do, most people would tell you that know me in that situation, is I would have directly confronted it. I would have brought it out in the public.
Yep.
I would have challenged it and made sure that it was seen for what it was. And, I would have lived with whatever the consequences were. Most people would tell you that I really struggle with dishonesty, and I struggle with anyone who is portraying something that is not real and true. But in that decision, I went against what I would normally do, and I simply made a decision to walk away. And I, to this day, look back and think, what if? What should I have done? Ultimately, things worked out there. Those board members ultimately lost their positions. Those staff members ultimately either moved on or lost their positions.
Yep.
And a school district is a organization with an eternal lifetime, basically. It's going to be there forever, and so the district went on. But I always think back, should I have been more vocal? Should I have fought against what I saw was a lack of, good leadership? What was a challenge to providing equity for all students? And so, I went against my own character there, and it was a learning experience for me that I'll take forever.
Sure. I think we all have those. I can certainly think of a number of times in my career as well. But I think that in your case, the fact that you walked away from it must have been a function of you not being in an environment where you could depend on others supporting that kind of strong character that you actually had, which had stimulated you to walk away and to let go because of some concerns of ethics or what have you, or what others that probably we won't go into too much detail. But I actually respect your decision and not being a part of it for much longer based on some of the discussions that we had even 2 years ago. A little bit about the United States state of education now. I've read some statistics where United States lags behind in terms of standardized tests in math. Germany is way up there. Some other subjects as well, or science. Where is the United States healthcare system, and where is the Kentucky healthcare system in terms of standardized tests, or how's it performing according to your estimates right now?
Well, it always depends on the measures that you use to evaluate it.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned, standardized assessments and measures.
Yep.
There's a couple of things that have to be understood there. First of all, if you look under the results that most of the world reports under, most of the industrialized world reports under what's known as PISA, which is administered by OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperative Development, out of Paris. Most countries are members of OECD and report on PISA testing. We don't do PISA testing in the United States except for on sample basis. So that's the first thing is you have to think about you're comparing not consistent types of exams in most cases. So you have to only look at just the sample results of PISA in the US. But if you do look at those results, you're correct in what is reported is if the students who do take the PISA exam in the United States shows that the US is behind, specifically in math and science areas. But I think it's just important to note that, as I mentioned earlier, teachers teach to the exam and to the accountability system that they're put in. Yeah. And our teachers don't teach for PISA because PISA is not adopted in the U.S. To be done. So I think that's one thing that has to be considered. But the other thing that I think is just as important to think about is that, again, we in the U.S. Assess every student every year in reading and math. No other no other country in the world does that. And so our own system is not the system that allows teachers to prepare students to be as successful as they could be, in my judgment and opinion. And then I have to add to that, the last statement is that the measures that are being used are changing rapidly because the work world is changing. You know, you probably hear a lot of conversation about what's the future of work look like, you know, with artificial intelligence and those things and how work is changing. Yep. Education is not changing as quickly as work is, but it should be. So if we're going to talk about what the future of work looks like, we need to be talking about what the future of learning looks like in education, to change it to make sure that the two are aligned.
From an amateur standpoint, for me personally, I imagine that those standardized tests are not the best measure of intelligence. And I would probably prefer those apprenticeships, those hands-on apprenticeships that you had instituted that had really impressed me, 2 years ago when you and I spoke, as being particular metrics, because you were able to tie the value of education to the economy, to individual development as well. So I would personally love to see more of those types of programs implemented.
If I could add to that real quickly, just Sure. as another statement, Yep. Standardized assessments don't measure critical thinking. They don't measure problem solving. They don't measure communication. Those are the things that we want students to know and be able to do in today's world. As I mentioned earlier, content knowledge is a commodity now. Most standardized tests measure content knowledge. Mm-hmm. And so if all we're measuring is content knowledge, is it really even relevant to the education system and to the lifelong learning goals that we have for kids?
And it seems like that's one thing that you would like to be transformed.
Absolutely. I'd like to be part of that. As I kind of close my career out, I'm in the waning days of my career. I've been doing this for 36 years now. Yeah. And, as I finish the rest of my career, my hope is to be part of even just a small part of the transformation of the system as it moves forward.
Thank you very much, Tom, for a lot of your perspectives. I think that this has truly been a privilege. I appreciated your time. I want to introduce you to those who are going to listen or see this discussion of ours, and want you to tell us what your escapes are or what activities or hobbies you like. I know that you're in Kentucky, and you mentioned bourbon, sharing some bourbon one day, you and I know you're a fan of it. Anything else?
Well, my love being with my family, of course. That's one of the blessings that I've actually had as compared to a lot of people during COVID, is I've gotten to be with my family, which has been great for me, and it's been a wonderful opportunity to get to spend quality time even with my granddaughter, which has been great. So that's one of the things that I have to mention. The other thing that I would mention, I'm an avid golfer. I play spring, summer, fall. I'll play 4 or 5 times a week. So I love to golf. And I mentioned earlier reading. I read avidly as well. You mentioned the bourbon. I'm a collector. One of the things about Kentucky that I have to say is that, not all bourbon's made in Kentucky, but 95% of it is. And that 95% is all made within a 60-mile radius of my house. Yeah. And so I live in bourbon country. And so it's a great thing, and I love it and enjoy it.
Yeah. Well, I wish you the best of luck in the surgeries that you have coming up that you mentioned. Lots of health to you, and all the best, Tom. Thank you very much. How would people get in touch with you?
Yeah, they can always find me on, social media. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, and of course on LinkedIn, but my personal email account is tom.shelton13@gmail.com. So it's just tom.shelton, SHELTON13@gmail.com.
Okay, great. Thank you. And what's your handle on Twitter, on the social media? Just
Tom Shelton 47.
So Tom Shelton 47, everyone. You can follow him. We have a leader, we have a mentor, and we have an expert in education. Tom Shelton, thank you very much for your time. Also follow All Out Coach. And with that, thank you very much, Tom. Have a great
Thank you very much. It was great to be here, and I enjoyed our conversation.
Likewise.